while I do a quick overview of why we're all here. All right. So this is a meetup event, and sometimes people are concerned about their privacy. So this is a public meetup event. So there's always a quick disclaimer that I do record these, and occasionally I will use them. But normally what I've been doing is I've been only using the portion which I'm the only one presenting. And then when we get into the live discussions, I don't post any of that. But this is just a disclaimer that these are going to be recorded. I also have to let people in manually. So somebody just came on. I'm going to go ahead and continue with this. So the agenda today is I'm going to talk about the podcast that I just completed season 1 of. What was my mission? What was my approach? And we're going to talk about it. We're going to let everybody kind of do self-introductions. And then for this event, we're going to do what's called reverse Q&A, which means I'll ask the questions, but then everybody will share their answers, their advice, and their experience for the same question. All right. So first is, why am I doing this? So as we all know, you don't really make any money directly from podcasting, but it's a lot of effort to do a podcast. So what is the reason that I'm doing this podcast? My purpose is I want to try to improve U.S.-China relations. And while I don't have the influence to do that, and I'm not in politics, what I can do is I can help change the mindset of each individual, one individual at a time. Basically by helping more Americans better understand how Chinese think, why they behave the way they do, and what we can do to create new interaction patterns and better outcomes. And of course, the context of all this is how it applies to business relationships. Now, what have I done? Well, what I've done is I've launched a podcast called the China Myth Podcast, and we've completed the entire season 1, which is 10 episodes. For each episode, if you guys have downloaded the listener's guide, for each episode, there is a list of questions and Chinese concepts that accompany each episode. So if you're trying to improve your ability to do business in China and you're frustrated with your current communication patterns, the listener's guide is something that can help you do that. In addition to listening to the podcast, I also publish every episode on Kindle Vella, so you can actually read it instead of listen to it. I go live every Tuesday, which is what this is, but this is a Zoom meeting instead of a YouTube live. And then I've also started publishing these YouTube shorts, which are 60 seconds of key concepts that I think are important for Americans or Westerners doing business in China. Now, this is a very, very kind of complex issue, and we're all conditioned to think in a certain way, which makes collaborating often difficult. So the question that really I need to answer as somebody who's going to take you on this journey is, how do we plan to do that? I mean, what is the journey for you to be able to create new communication patterns and achieve better outcomes? So we first need a mindset framework for navigating the Chinese arena. So metaphorically, we say, how do you play and win the China game inside the Chinese arena? And we have to understand the framework, the mindset framework. So when we are not Chinese and we're doing business in China, we have to understand there are things we know and things we don't know, but there are also things we don't know, which are our unknown unknowns, and what I call false known knowns. These are things that we think we know that are actually true for us, but they're actually false in the Chinese cultural context. Now, in order to navigate this Chinese arena, I think there are certain things that are really important. And all of us are no longer children. And as we start growing older, there are 2 innate abilities that I've observed myself and all adults who aren't artists. Now, Chris is an artist, but we stop using 2 things that are really important, and that is imagination and curiosity. So when you go to a foreign culture that's really different from what you're accustomed to, you have to remember what it was to be a child in which everything was new and you were curious as opposed to judgmental. And you would use your imagination to really try to understand why people were doing the things they were doing and how can I learn that too. And I think curiosity, purpose-driven curiosity, is the key to developing greater awareness. And it's the opposite of judgment. So if you judge somebody, you're not curious. Imagination, which has to be positive, is the way to develop empathy, which is understanding what we're trying to do, how other people think, why they behave the way they do. If you can develop empathy, those innate abilities will take you a long way. Now, from that greater imagination and curiosity, you can start developing what I call essential soft skills that matter. And what are those soft skills? One is awareness, which includes self-awareness, cultural awareness, and situational awareness. And the other is empathy, which is knowing how other people feel and why. And this is the key to unlocking possibilities to connect on a deeper level. And this is how you can play and win the China game. Now, as you're going through your own kind of redevelopment, right? If you have 20 years of experience or 30 years of experience, a lot of times you have to be aware of that you're pretty set and you understand how the world works and how people should behave. The key to doing business in China, if you're an American like me, is you have to adjust your thinking. Okay? You begin by adjusting your mindset, which is your perspective and worldview. If you have one set of perspectives and worldviews, and you have somebody, just think of the United States, Republicans and Democrats, okay? If you believe one thing strongly and you can't adjust your mindset or perspective to accept what the other side is trying to say, then you're going to repel the other side. And we see that in American politics. So your mindset, if it's not healthy, will repel your Chinese counterparts. So through developing these essential soft skills, the key is develop a new perspective, a healthy mindset, and eventually adjust your attitude, which is, if there are language and cultural barriers, your attitude is what people feel. So you can say all the right words, but if your attitude isn't conducive to working together or to listening, then you're not going to get very far. And then ultimately, with a different attitude, a different mindset, then you can start executing your winning tactics. How do you create new patterns of interaction? What is your modus operandi, and what are the things that you need to do in China? For example, in China, very simply, you have to give face. What does that mean? How do you condition yourself to naturally always give face, even with someone who disagrees with you? So out of these 10 episodes of the China Myth podcast, each one focuses on a very important concept that you as a non-Chinese person may not be familiar with or may not know how to implement into your own attitude, mindset, and approach. Okay, so the episode 1 talks about guanxi. This is really how Chinese people operate. Episode 2 talks about li yi, which is what they consider. How do Chinese people consider in making their decisions? And then it just goes down the list of all the things that are central concepts in Chinese culture, but if you don't really understand them in the Chinese cultural context, it's going to hurt your ability to achieve greater collaboration. So I'm not going to go through these individually, but each episode of the podcast highlights one area that I think is really important for you to improve how you play and win the China game. Now, when you take all this together, these are what I call Chinese cultural concepts. And these become the foundation of your ability to do business in China. Because what I've done is I've created stories around these concepts, so you can have greater context of what's really going on, and that would allow you to build greater cultural awareness. And again, metaphorically, we're trying to play and win the China game inside the Chinese arena, but what it really means is we want to develop new communication patterns and better outcomes. And a lot of people say this about what is the definition of insanity and all of this stuff. So I think it applies, which means we cannot create a new reality in China with the same mindset that led to the current one. So I would give this advice to our political leaders, but if you've been doing business in China for 10 or 15 years and you're frustrated with the same things over and over again, instead of blaming Chinese people or really being frustrated with Chinese people, think that something that you can control is actually your mindset. And if you can adjust your mindset based on the foundational cultural concepts that I'm sharing here, then you're going to be able to position yourself to, again, metaphorically speaking, play and win the China game. All right. So basically, this is the China Myth podcast. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and this will hopefully help you on your journey. And as I said, I've also go live every Tuesday, and there's a lot of ways to engage with me. If you're listening on YouTube or watching the replay, it's all in the description. And since this is a meetup event and not just a YouTube live where you type your questions into the chat, we're going to begin. Okay, so I'm going to let each one of you introduce yourself, but first I'm going to start before I unmute everybody and let you guys in. So this is going to be what I call reverse Q&A, which means I ask the question and then all of you get to share your answers. So I'm going to start with the central question in the last episode of season 1. Okay, and this is a fundamental question that people deal with when they're doing business in China. How do you prevent, stop, or deal with circular conversations? Okay, so in Chinese, 不要 means don't. Let them 恶性循环, which means spiral out of control. How do you prevent a conversation from spiraling out of control? This is the fundamental question. And this is fundamentally when people are doing business in China, whether they're speaking through translators or they're speaking in English or they're speaking in Chinese, this is what they're mainly frustrated with. All right, again, 恶性循环 means to enter a vicious cycle or spiral out of control. So my answer to this, and I just created a YouTube short, is you simply need to learn 3 Chinese characters plus a 4th one to pivot. Now, how easy is that? Learn 3 Chinese characters and 1 more Chinese character to pivot. So what we're going to do today, if you don't speak Chinese, is we're going to learn 3 Chinese characters. All right. So whenever you're discussing with someone in China, you're always either going to feel like your opinion is being challenged, it's being questioned, or you're at the beginning of a disagreement because you don't know what's going on. And whenever your Chinese counterpart makes an assertion, my advice is always to begin your response with these 3 characters. 没关系. 没关系. That's the only thing you have to learn. That's how you begin every response to an assertion that your Chinese counterparts make. 没关系. Now, what does 没关系 mean? It means no problems or no worries. So in Chinese culture, why would you begin something that you disagree with no problem or no worries? Like they're saying something that you completely disagree with, yet I'm advising you to say, 没关系, no problem or no worries. The reason is, in the context of Chinese culture, it's important to help people preserve face. All right? Preserve their 面子 or their face. And if you begin like most Americans might is, no, that's not right. No, we can't do that. No, that's completely wrong. Well, that's going to lead to a circular conversation because you put the Chinese people on the defense. They have to start protecting what they actually mean, which you did not understand. Hence, we're into a circular conversation. When you start your response with 没关系, no matter what they say, no problems, no worries, then you have lowered their defenses and you've given them a face-saving way to pivot in case, now they understand what you're saying. You're giving them what I call an off-ramp from a spotlight of embarrassment, right? Because if you're just directly criticizing what they say, then they have to be defensive. They have to re-explain what they say in a different context, which you probably didn't understand anyway. Hence, circular conversation. Hence, frustrating communications. So, condition yourself to respond to any assertion, challenge, question, or disagreement with 没关系, no problem, no worries. And then try to figure out how to continue the conversation in a more constructive and productive way. All right? Now, sometimes you need to learn how to respond strategically because you didn't reply fast enough. And the Chinese people already sense that you either didn't understand them or you disagreed with them or they're going to be criticized or they're going to be embarrassed. So they start making excuses. They start giving you explanations that make no sense. It happens all the time. You also start your response with 没关系. Okay, whatever they say, 没关系, but then you add a pivot word. That pivot word is 那. Okay, 没关系, 那. 那 means, well, in that case, so you're disagreeing with me, you're making excuses, and you say, oh, 没关系, 那, let's try this, or 那, how about you tell me what you would do? Okay, again, it's all about preserving face as opposed to using the very Western direct communication style where it's either you're right, it's either a yes or no. It's either right or it's wrong. Westerners think in absolute truth, so everything should have a right or wrong way or yes or no answer. Chinese don't think that way. They think in relative truths, relative terms. Everything's relative. So if you feel they're making excuses because they don't want to do what you ask, don't challenge them or confront them directly. Just say 没关系, 那. Or if you only speak English, well, no problem. In that case, tell me how you would do this, or tell me blah, 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 blah. So again, it's all about preserving face. We talk about giving face and all of that stuff. Helping your Chinese counterparts preserve face is probably one of the most important skills you need to develop when you're doing business in China. Learn 3 words, 没关系, and learn 1 pivot word, 那, which means in that case, which allows them to pivot and allows them to preserve face, which allows the two of you to move into more positive and constructive discussions as opposed to an endless circular conversation. All right? Now, so out of every episode of season 1 of the Chinese podcast, there is a key question that this podcast tries to add context and nuance to. It tries to help you answer. So these are the questions. I don't know how many of you have really had an opportunity to listen in details, but hopefully what this will allow you to do is go back and re-listen to the podcast with a better sense of purpose, because now you've also downloaded the listener's guide. You have every little cheat sheet of the Chinese concepts and the key questions, and you'll be able to go back and really try to listen with purpose on what you want to learn. All right, so I'm going to stop the share screen